Do you remember the Kodak moment? For almost 100 years, that phrase meant everything. It was the joy of a birthday party, the magic of a wedding, the quiet beauty of a family vacation. Kodak wasn't just a company, it was a part of our lives. It was a cultural institution. They owned the color yellow. They literally taught the world how to capture its memories. At their peak, they were an absolute untouchable monopoly. So how did they die? How did a company that owned 90% of the film market in America simply vanish? The story you think you know is that they were a slow, old dinosaur killed by the meteor of digital photography. But that is a complete lie. And the truth is 1,000 times more shocking, more ironic, and more tragic. Did you know that the world's very first digital camera was invented in 1975? And did you know where it was invented? Inside a top-secret laboratory at Kodak headquarters in Rochester, New York, by a young, brilliant electrical engineer named Steve Sasson. He's been asked to see if a new piece of technology, a charged-coupled device, could be used for imaging. After a year of tinkering, he creates a monster. It was a strange, toaster-sized device, a Frankenstein's monster of lenses, digital cassettes, and circuit boards. It took 23 seconds to capture its first image. The picture was black and white, with a resolution of 0.01 megapixels, and it had to be displayed on a television screen. It was crude, it was slow, it was ugly, but it was the world's first digital camera. Sasson and his team were ecstatic. They knew they had created a revolution. They brought their incredible invention to the powerful executives of Kodak. They did a presentation. They showed them the future. And how did the leaders of Kodak react? They were not impressed. In fact, they were terrified. Their response, which is now famous in business history, was this: "That's cute, but don't tell anyone about it." I want you to truly understand the psychology of this moment. The executives saw the technology, they understood it worked, but they were not looking at it with the eyes of an innovator. They were looking at it with the eyes of a gatekeeper, a protector of the current empire, and all they could see was a threat. Their entire $100 billion business was built on selling film. This new invention didn't use film. It was the enemy. It was a direct threat to their golden goose. The executives asked Sasson a series of questions, all driven by fear. Why would anyone ever want to look at their pictures on a TV screen? How would you store these pictures? What about the quality? They were looking for reasons why it would fail, not for reasons why it could succeed. This is a classic psychological trap called cannibalization phobia. The company was so afraid of eating its own profitable film business that it chose to starve its own future. The fear of losing what they had was 1,000 times more powerful than the excitement of what they could create. So what did Kodak do with the most important invention of the 20th century? They buried it. They patented the technology to make sure no one else could use it. And then they locked it away in a corporate vault. They chose to pretend it didn't exist. They believed they could control the future. They believed they could keep the world in the age of film forever, simply because it was more profitable for them. It was an act of supreme arrogance. For the next 2 decades, Kodak continued to make billions from their film business. They were living in a state of comfortable, profitable denial. Meanwhile, the world of technology was moving on. Other companies like Sony and Canon began to develop their own digital cameras. The technology was getting better, cheaper, and smaller every single year. Kodak saw this happening. They weren't stupid, but their response was tragically flawed. Instead of embracing the digital future they had invented, they treated it as a side project, a hobby. They released some of the first consumer digital cameras, but they deliberately made them clunky and difficult to use. Their entire marketing strategy was designed to protect the film business. They would advertise their digital cameras as a good way to decide which pictures were good enough to print on Kodak paper using Kodak chemicals. They saw the digital world as a servant to the physical world, not as its replacement. This is a profound psychological failure. It's called cognitive dissonance. It's the mental stress you feel when you hold two contradictory beliefs at the same time. The executives at Kodak knew deep down that digital was the future, but their entire identity, their entire corporate culture was tied to the beautiful, romantic, and profitable world of film. To embrace digital would be to admit that everything they had built their careers on was becoming obsolete. And that was a truth too painful to accept. So they lived a lie. They told themselves that digital was just a fad, that real photographers would always prefer the quality of film. The end came with the speed and brutality of an execution. As digital cameras became cheap and powerful, and as camera phones began to appear, the film business didn't just decline. It fell off a cliff. In the span of just a few years, Kodak's golden goose was dead. The cash machine that had fueled the company for a century was turned off. The company went into a state of panic. They tried to reinvent themselves. They tried to become a printer company. They tried to get into pharmaceuticals. They were a rudderless ship, a company that had lost its identity. They had spent so many years being the film company that they had no idea how to be anything else. Finally, in 2012, Eastman Kodak, the American icon, the company that had put a camera in every home and taught the world to say cheese, declared bankruptcy. The giant was dead. It had been killed by the very future it had invented and abandoned. The story of Kodak is perhaps the greatest cautionary tale in all of business history. It is a lesson in the psychology of success. It proves that being the market leader, being the most profitable, and even being the most innovative means nothing if you don't have the psychological courage to embrace change. Kodak wasn't killed by the competition. It was a suicide. It was a company that fell in love with its own product instead of falling in love with its customers' needs. And it's a brutal, timeless reminder that the future doesn't care how successful you used to be. It arrives whether you are ready for it or not. And if you are too afraid to let go of the past, the future will simply erase you.